Alright, welcome back for another 3D primer, and I've had too much spaghetti, one might argue. So let's just get into it. So I'm doing Substance Painter this time around. This is a bit more advanced tool, but I'm going to try and break it down in a way that will just cover the very basics. Hopefully get you in and looking around and intrigued enough that you go look, other tutorials, other documentation, stuff like that. So you got Substance Painter, you got your trial, you dropped your money, you got your program, sweet. So I've made a example model real quick. So I've made a high poly and a low poly. I'm going to bake my textures in Substance, and you can bake it in other programs. You can use XNormal, whatever. I'm going to use Substance built-in baking. So you first start it up. You're going to start a new document, and when you do that, you're going to get this new project box right here. And so you're going to go to select first. You need to actually apply a mesh before you go in. This is going to be your low poly. So you go to select, and I've already got this set up, so I'm going to choose my low poly model right here. Okay. Then you can also choose your document resolution. You go to, I'll just do 1024. And then you can import any additional normal maps, other textures, things like that. I'm going to do my baking in here, so I don't need anything else right now. I just chose my low poly and my document resolution, so click OK. That'll start up, and you can see I've got my low resolution model here. I just made a flywheel type model, and you'll see once I bake out the high poly. So you go to your texture settings, which if you go down to display settings, this window right here, also, let's see, you can go to view and views and turn these windows on and off if you don't have them. So you can turn this on and go to texture settings. This is where you're going to apply any of the textures that you made. Now if you baked your own textures outside of the program, you can go to the texture tabs in your shelf right here. Go to textures, and you can simply drag and drop your textures from outside the program into here, and then they'll show up in here, and you'll be able to drag and drop them over these various slots. Now the reason I want to bake in Substance is because there's a number of maps that it uses to generate textures. Substance really heavily relies on all the different textures that you can bake to generate different cool looks. So I'm going to go to baking textures here, bake textures. Here I'm going to choose which ones I want to bake. I'm going to bake all the available ones that it's going to need. And here's your high poly parameters. You can choose your high definition mesh. Now if you watch the other 3D primer for baking high to low, you know that when you're doing this kind of work, you make your low poly mesh, which is going to be the in-game version. It's UV'd, unwrapped and everything. And your high poly version, which is normally like a ZBrush sculpt or a sub D model, something that is, like it says, high definition, high poly. So I'll choose my model, high poly model, and I'm going to bake with a cage. A cage is simply the same resolution as your low poly. It has to be the same poly count, geo basically, and it's been adjusted to make projecting the texture easier. So cage file, cage. Now I have these selected. I'm going to do 1024, and I've got all my sweet things checked here. I'm going to do anti-aliasing 2x2. And now I'm going to bake. I'm going to move this aside. You'll see it happening. Hopefully we don't crash, but I'll be right back if we do. So bake initial shading group textures. So this guy's going to bake out real quick. It should be pretty quick. You can see it forming right here. It's making all the textures and it's starting to take that normal map information. And there we go. All right. So now if you look in your texture settings window, you have all the different textures that are required, and we'll talk about that stuff in just a second. And I have a model here that is the same low poly that I had before, but I have, there's some bugginess down on the bottom there, but we'll ignore that. We'll work up here. Why not? And you can see now I have all the definition from my high poly flywheel onto this low poly. So the reason these meshes, these maps are important is this is what's going to tell one of the most powerful things in Substance, generators, what to do. So if I go up into my layers, this works a lot like in Photoshop. I can create a fill layer right here, and that's just going to be a solid color. and I can change that color on the right. If I look at base color, I can choose a new color. You can see if I make it red, it's going to tint everything red. So I'm going to choose a base color for this flywheel. Go ahead and make it a little darker. Why not? So one of the things, and it's a little bit out of the scope of this tutorial, but I'll mention it, is the understanding of Pbr textures. That's physically based rendering. What that means is it's different from a standard specular color and normal map setup. This is using a albedo, which is essentially your color map, a normal, and a roughness and a metalness map. So again, like I said, it's outside of the scope, but just a quick recap. Metallic is simply a map that is, it depends on, this is a really high level view, and really you should dig down into it and find out what Pbr really is and get used to it. But metallic is essentially a map that says something is either metal or not, which may sound silly, but in real life it's, you know, kind of how things work. They're either metal or not. Roughness, which actually describes the smoothness of a texture, a surface. So it's either super smooth glossy or it's really rough, and what that's going to change is how the light diffuses over your model and looks basically fakes lighting. Then you have height, which is your normal map. So just knowing that basic stuff, you're able to add those elements here. You have your color, which is what we just had. You can toggle that on and off. You can see it goes white if I turn it off. Then I have height. I can turn that on and off. I don't need it because I don't have a normal map and I don't want to paint height right now. I can turn roughness on and off and metalness on and off. So you can see if I slide roughness one way or the other, if I make it all the way black, I'm basically defining it as a completely smooth surface. Remember, you're working in definition of roughness. So black is, it's not rough at all, which means I now see the reflection of the environment map that's in the setting here. And if I crank it up, then it gets more and more rough. And metallic, it's going to get a little bit darker on the edges because it's basically saying I'm a metal surface, so I'm not going to reflect light the same way as a non-metallic surface. So I'm going to go ahead and make this basically full metal, kind of give it a little bit of shine, but not too much. And that's going to be my base color. So that's awesome. That's great. That helps define what's happening here. But I'm going to make a new layer, and I'm going to make it a smart material. That's this little sphere dude right here. So all the things you're going to make, this is just a new layer, like a regular layer you paint on in Photoshop, a fill layer, and a smart material layer. So this is something that's fun to play around with at first, and you can use them later, and there's a lot of cool stuff you can tweak with. But the more you mess around with this, the kind of the less you'll use these. You may use them as a starting point. So I'll use, let's see, steel paint. There we go. Now using the map information that we baked out, you can see it's basically made something that is painted red with the edges worn away to reveal metal underneath. And this is just a material that is a part of substance, and you've done next to nothing already. So you can drop down this folder. It looks like a little play button on the folder. You drop that down. There's a bunch of things in here. You can change, there's a red, which is this paint with a mask, and the mask is run by a generator. And this is where you get into the weeds a bit, but I'll break it down for you again right after this. There's all these different settings that you can adjust that will change. You can see I'm adjusting some of the things on the model right now, all these different sliders, and that will change the settings of how things look, how painted it is, how much, like how dirty certain things are, how much different maps drive the look. There's all kinds of cool stuff in here. So there's a lot of fun things to play around with. But for now, that's a smart material. For now, I'm going to go back to this solid one. So let's say I want to kind of do something similar. I want to make it dirty, basically. I'm going to make a new fill layer. There's a bunch of ways to do this, just like in everything else. Oh, I'm in this folder. I got to delete this. There we go. There's always a million ways to do something. But for me, I'm going to choose a darker color, like a dirt. And remember, we have our roughness settings as well. So I'm actually going to make this all the way rough because it's dirt and it's not metal. So I'm going to make it all the way black. And I'm going to add a mask. You right click, you can add a black mask or a white mask, whatever, but I'm going to use a black mask. That's going to hide it. Now that I have my color, which adds the settings we just looked at, and I have my mask, I can right click this mask and I can click add generator. When I do that, that's going to drive the mask. I'm no longer able to paint in this mask like you would expect. But I have this cool generator thing where if I click generator, I can choose a few different types here. So I'm going to do dirt. And now I have this generator that reads the maps, these guys that we baked out earlier, as information for where to put this dirt. And again, I can change the amount of things, grunge amount, really make it dirty or not, make it kind of gross in the middle of the gears there. I can change the scale of the actual grunge. I can do all kinds of cool stuff, edge masking. We'll go ahead and we'll put it about there. That looks kind of cool. So now it looks a little dirty. So I decide, maybe I want it to look rusty. Now I can go back to this layer. I can change this color. Maybe go to something a little more red, reddish brown, kind of like it's been around for a while. And I could do, some things like I can just make a new layer and paint on top of it. So if I wanted to write something on here, you know, like, this one is trash, throw it away. You can paint just like you normally would on any model, so you can actually ignore all the PBR abilities that Substance has and simply do a painting that doesn't have, like I can turn off height, rough, material, normal, and just do color, and only paint color on my model and make a hand-painted model just like you would in something like a 3D coat or something like that. The other thing to remember on a regular layer like this, all your settings for height, roughness, metallic are per brush stroke. So whereas with a fill layer, you're defining it for the entire layer, with this, you're defining it per brush stroke. So I could do red and super metallic. It reflects on the shader ball here too. So I can paint that down, but then I could turn it all the way down, make the color white, and then that's on there too. So this isn't my preferred way to work because you can easily accidentally have a million different material types going on. It can be a little hard to suss out what's going on. My favorite way to actually do things, what I feel is the most efficient way, is use a fill layer, make it the type of material that you want, and then mask it out, right click, add a black mask. And then in the mask, just paint black or white or gray, and then it'll reveal that. And now it's a lot less destructive. I can go back and change the color of this, decide, you know what, I actually want that to be a green metal paint for some weird reason. I'm making a Christmas ornament or something like that. And you can change all those different settings and have a lot more power at your fingertips for that. Get some water there, getting some smacky lips. So that is the basics for painting in here, the basics for making a generator, and let's see. The other thing I guess I should go over here is I have my 3D view. I have a 3D 2D view where it does a breakdown of my UV map, and I can actually paint on this layer. I can do all the same painting and effects that I do on my 3D model in here as in my unwrap. And they reflect on each other. It's happening in real time. And I could go to 2D only and just see my UV if I needed to. Most of the time I'm just working in straight 3D because a lot of things are driven by generators and all sorts of crazy stuff like that. So if you want to, let's see, let's do another layer here, and I'll give it another mask. Change the color, we'll just make it like another red. So I'm painting on here. I want to do something a little different. I can go to my brush pull down here and I can choose the alpha. There's a bunch of different alphas. You can add your own and do all sorts of crazy cool stuff. Do plus sign here. You can change the way those work. I could do different behaviors for it. Shapes, you can add stencils. Stencils will let you project an image overlay onto it and actually do exactly what it says. Use it as a stencil and draw on things at any angle. The other neat thing that you probably want to play around with, because they're just fun, are particles. And let me make sure I've got good color. I think white color. Use that. Let me make sure this is actually going to do what I want it to do. Yeah, there we go. All right. So now I've got my mask set up here. So remember, this is painting in the mask, so it's going to reveal whatever's on this layer. You can do rain, and it'll throw particles onto it. And you're not going to see much on the top because rain's not going to go anywhere on top. But you can see gathering in the corners here, gathering on the edges. It's actually using the particle effect to reveal the mask underneath. It's doing all the painting for you. So there's a cool effect like you could do burn. I want to burn the bottom of this or something. Doesn't look quite right in red, but if I set this to, okay, now that's burnt, I'm going to make that black, and I'm going to turn the metallic off, and it's going to be completely rough. You can see I get some cool burnt effects going on with it. And then there's, you know, sweet, silly things like laser impact, and all kinds of stuff that honestly you can use these weird things and find a neat way to kind of manipulate it on your model. It'll read the normal maps, and that is telling it what direction to do things. And you can find really really cool effects using these particle brushes. And let's see, you have your regular brush choices in here in this tab. This is a preset, so I could do fingerprints. Go over it and let's change the size. Put some fingerprints on this guy if I wanted to give some smudges for maybe on the handle of a gun or something. I could put fingerprint smudges down, some mold on something. There's a bunch of cool brushes that are all built into Substance to support you. And like I said, you can actually add any alphas that you make yourself. You can do all sorts of cool things. If you have Substance Designer, you can make more materials that Substance Painter can use. There's all kinds of neat stuff. And there's a lot of pre-built things that you can use to help define. So see, we have smart masks here. Let's see, just reminding myself, going through this last tab here. So we got materials. You can choose default materials to paint by. You can see if I choose it, should switch that ball. Oh, I gotta be on a new layer. Oh no, don't crash. I may have made every. Alright. So there, you can see now that I have my own layer, I select that ball, and I can paint that shader down. And I want to do this wood thing. And now I can paint this wood grain on here. I wouldn't recommend this because everyone would know you use the default wood grain in Substance. But still, cool stuff. And you can also use these smart masks. I'm going to do cavity rust. Drag and drop that onto my layer. And instead of using the mask that I painted, it uses this cavity rust. And you can do this with all these. So dirt heavy, we'll apply that. So now I'm using that instead. And go back to cavity rust, and you can go back to the actual generator itself and mess around with all these things and change how it looks. So very basics, and I'm going to go over the very, very basics again, just so the usual recap at the end of these things. You bring in your low poly model. We'll go ahead and start a new one. Actually, no, I don't want to do that. You guys saw. You start a new one. You choose your low poly model and any textures that you might have that you want to bring in along with it. I just started out with just the model. You bring that in, and then you go to Bake Textures in the Texture Settings tab, which again you can go to View, Views, and turn any of those on and off if you don't see them. And you go to the Texture Settings tab down here, and you click Bake Textures, and you can choose which textures you want to bake or rebake. Choose your high poly model, choose a cage if you have them, and bake, and that'll generate all the textures that drive the generators. So once you've done that, you can just make a regular layer for this guy. I recommend using fill layers. I feel like they give you a lot more power. And once you make a fill layer, you can adjust the colors on the right with base color, all these other settings. Remember, PBR settings. You don't have to behave with PBR workflow. If you want to just paint on the model, you could turn all that stuff off and just do color. Then if you add a mask, we'll go to add a black mask. And you can choose any one of these smart masks, or you can right click and add a generator. Let's do that. So you do that, click, choose a generator, dirt, and then you can mess with all the different sliders to adjust how things affect it and give it a different look, which will reveal the layer underneath. Once you're done with all that, you just go to File, Export Textures, and here you can actually choose what you want to export for. And it'll tell you, I want to export for Unreal Engine 4. And it'll build the textures in a way that actually work for Unreal. So you'll have a texture where all the different maps are put into the RGB channels of one texture, and you can break it apart with a material in Unreal. Or you can do a spec gloss non-PBR export, which means it'll take the information that it has and do its best to recreate that with a specular workflow as opposed to PBR. Also, all the different unities, V-Ray, a bunch of other settings, Dota 2, Keyshot, CryEngine, Corona. There's tons of presets in here that if you choose them, they will change what kind of textures are generated. You can also configure that and make different textures with different settings, a little beyond the scope of this, but you can manipulate it how you want. You do export, choose I want to do it for Unreal, and do export, and then it goes to the folder that I specify up there. I can go to open folder once it's done, and you can see I have some other project stuff in there, but you can see these maps are the ones that were generated that reflect my my flywheel that I made right here. So that's it. That is the very basic look at Substance. There's a ton of other stuff you can do in here. There's a lot of tools like the regular brush and erase and clone stamp and things like that, smudge tool, kind of the things you'd expect in Photoshop. There's more if you dive into materials and how they're built and how you can use brushes and particles and all these other things. But that's the very basic view of how to get started in Substance. And thank you for watching. I really hope that is enough to intrigue you to the point that you go seek out other tutorials, other information on how to use Substance. It's really a powerful, powerful program and is quickly becoming an industry standard. So thank you guys, and next time we'll go over something completely different. But thank you for watching, and see you later.